All right. Good afternoon. And what a beautiful day it is here in Oxford. I hope the same is true for wherever you are joining us from. Thank you for joining us for today's South Talk, Traditional Crafts of Coastal Louisiana with Maida Owens and Janie Luster. This South Talk is part of a new event series we call Art in Barnard Lecture Series. The series is named after our building name, Barnard Observatory, and the inspiration for the series name is really more of a wish. We at the center would like to incorporate more physical art in the building and topics of art and Southern art in particular in our programming. The center is fortunate to have a committee of thoughtful and talented colleagues across the state that have a mission to assist with these two goals. The committee members are Melanie Antonelli, Adrian Dominic, Turi Flucker, the center's associate director for publications, Jimmy Thomas, Amanda Malloy, who serves as chair of this committee, and she is also a graduate of the Southern Studies Master's Program, and Maria Zarang, who will introduce today's speakers and serve as Q&A facilitator. Maria Zarang is the Folk and Traditional Arts Director at the Mississippi Arts Commission, where she manages the online publication Mississippi Folklife. She has published articles for the Louisiana Folklife Program, Journal of Folklore Research Reviews, Louisiana Folklore Miscellany, and the Journal of Ethnic American Literature. She has master's degrees in French and folklore from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and Indiana University, respectively. There seems to not have been a more perfect facilitator for today's topic than Maria. Maria, thank you very much for helping to organize this event and agreeing to take part in the discussion.
Thanks, Acton. I really appreciate the introduction. And I just have to say, I'm really happy to be a part of the Art in Barnard Lecture Series committee. I have really enjoyed my work with the committee so far, and I'm so looking forward to this talk. And it is an honor today to introduce to you Maida Owens and Janie Luster. I'm based in Mississippi. But as a native of Thibodaux, Louisiana, I have been following the work of the Bayou Culture Collaborative that Maida and Janie are a part of. And I really think that this work is really important because it shows that climate change touches every facet of our lives. And it really puts in jeopardy our communities and the traditions that these communities have had for generations. It what they're doing, the work that they're talking about, shows the human cost of climate change and land loss, and it just shows what we're really losing, which touches everything that we do in life. So I'm glad that we're talking about it and that we're able to present this conversation with you today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Maida and Janie by reading their bios. But first, I just want to let you know kind of how this is going to work. I'll read their bios, they will give their presentation, and then in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the hour, we're going to have a Q&A session with Maida and Janie. So please feel free to write your questions in the Q&A box below your screen on the Zoom platform. All right, so let's introduce Maida and Janie. Maida Owens has been with the Louisiana Division of the Arts since 1986 and manages the state's Folklife program, where she has worked with hundreds of traditional artists in their communities and curates the program's Folklife in Louisiana website. The program's current project is the Bayou Culture Collaborative, which helps to sustain the cultures of coastal Louisiana. Janie Luster is a master palmetto basket weaver and cultural preservationist of the United Houma Nation. Hailing from the community of Bayou DuLarge in Terrebone Parish, Luster comes from a long line of traditional healers and is a tribal advocate. All right, well, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you, Maida and Janie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us today. What I'm going to do is share some slides. And then Janie will, and they'll end with images of Janie's traditions and family. And then she will take over. So let me share our presentation. Today I want to talk about several traditions that are in coastal Louisiana, and I ended up really focusing on Southeast Louisiana, partially because this is one of the most areas most affected by Louisiana's land loss. I'm going to share with you this map by the U.S. Geological Survey just to show you the extent of what's happening. This is both the historical and the projected land loss through 2050. So some of this has not happened yet. And I want to point out a few areas that I'm going to talk about. This area is Terrebone. And you see Houma, Louisiana here. And Janie is from one of the 5 bayous that go down from Houma in Terrio. This is Bayou Lafourche, where you go down to Grand Isle. This is the Mississippi River, and this is Plaquemines Parish. I'll talk a little bit about the Croatian community that is along here and all of these oyster reefs. And then the 4th major area I'm going to talk about is St. Bernard Parish, which is just east of New Orleans. And that is where the Canary Islanders ended up. We call in Spanish, the Isleños. Now, the rest of the area there are many communities of French, Spanish, and many different native groups. But I do want to point out that most of the native groups are in the red areas. They're going to be one of the most profoundly affected cultural groups that we have. My personal concern with the land loss is about what happens to the cultures. So in response, in Louisiana, we have the Bayou Culture Collaborative. This grew out of the Louisiana Folklore Society meetings in Houma in spring of 2018. So this is all quite relatively new. And with the Folklore Society, other nonprofits, university centers and such, we are partnering to address some what happens to the traditional cultures in this process. So one of the things we've done is what we call the Passing It On workshops. And so over the last 3 years, there's ones going on now, we offer, through the Louisiana Folklore Society, we offer to help masters pass on a tradition. It doesn't have to be directly related to land loss, but it does need to be something meaningful within that particular group. So the Cajun Music Preservation Society in Thibodaux, Louisiana, focused on Cajun music. The Boat Building Center focused on boat building and paddle carving. The Houma Folklife Center focused on wood carving and such. Then I've worked with several Native American groups, and they have focused on herbal medicine, palmetto weaving, and then some of the things that you'll see Janie talk about today, the Spanish moss, the palmettos, and other traditions. It's been challenging during COVID. Some of them have met in person, but they've adapted to the COVID protocols. And here you see Jessica Brown at the African American Museum in Houma. And she's teaching young girls how to make cloth dolls. And you see them in pods with a family, you know, the girl and a family member. You'll see one of her dolls here. I'm going to start talking about textiles. This is all the other ones are directly related to the land and the environment. But of course, we do not limit this passing it on because we want to focus on traditions that are meaningful to the community. Because even if a community has to move, this type of tradition can be so closely tied in with the community identity that focusing on, you know, so we want to focus on those that mean the most to that community. I want to talk a little bit about two of the cultural groups, the woman and the crochet. This is Barbara Perez and Crochet by Cecilia Alfonso are from the Isleño community in St. Bernard. They're called Isleños because they're islanders from the Canary Islands, and they came at the same time as the Acadians during the late 1700s. And this particular settlement in St. Bernard was more isolated, and they retained the archaic Spanish language that they brought with them. And one of the traditions is their needlework. In the last few decades, they've had cultural exchanges and reconnected with the Canary Islanders. And one of the things that they discovered was that they had retained the color palette in their needlework that the Canary Islanders had. I'm sure all of you are familiar with crochet doilies like this, but note that they edged them in this blue, which was one of the characteristics of the Canary Islanders color palette. A much more recent group are the Croatians. They are in Plaquemines Parish. And most people know them as the oyster farmers and then also citrus growers. They were absolutely one of the most profoundly affected by Hurricane Katrina, as well as the St. Bernard's groups. Among the Croatian groups, Teresa Testfich's cut work is renowned in the community. Now you'll see a lot of photographs here that are object photographs rather than with people. And that's because they come from the Creole State exhibit, which is a collection that was created during the World's Fair in 1984 and has been on physical display in various formations in the state capitol. And there is now a virtual exhibit on the Folklife in Louisiana website. And so these two images in the center are from that. So you can find out more information about some of these traditions there, but some of the images come from other essays on the Folklife in Louisiana website. In this area, the rest of the traditions I'm going to talk about are directly related to the environment and the land. Boats are very important in this area, both the large-scale boats and the model making about the boats. Sometimes it's the full-size boat builder that makes the models, and sometimes there are other people who only make the models. On the left is Paul Paylos's oyster lugger with a little cabin. On the right is Cyril Billiot's shrimp boat. And you'll notice that the shrimp boat is fully rigged and ready to go. It's got a shrimp net. And you'll see at the end, these are the little weights that go with the shrimp nets. So some of the model makers go into incredible detail. Other carvers have focused on the Piro. The Piro you see on the upper right is in the state capitol. It was made at the 1984 World's Fair and is one of the last pirogues to be made out of a solid tree trunk. Those are not planks. That is completely carved out of one piece of wood. And this is very, the pirogue is very important in the symbolic mind of many of these communities. So you get different traditions of making models and toys that are pirogues. On the upper left is Claude Verret's pirogue, and he leans towards where people are creating scenarios with some of the crafts. Even corn shuck dolls can become scenarios where they're placed, even in a nativity scene. So this is in the scenario tradition and the model boat tradition. You see he has a paddle, a push pole, a gun, duck decoys, a bucket, and an ice chest with drinks in it. Below is Michael Parfay's. He's showing how the pirogue was painted typically. And this is a plank, these are plank pirogues, so they're a little different style than the dugout. But he also provides the paddle and the push pole. On the right are two examples of Raymond Sedadol's toy pirogues. Now, he made full-scale boats and was one of the most important boat builders in terms of teaching other people who are still alive today. But the toy pirogue becomes simpler and something that you would actually want a child to play with. Keeping children away from these is actually quite challenging, as with my grandchildren and my children too when they were younger. But also with boats comes paddles and oars. The top one is an oar. You see one of these, an oar is heavier and it has this ridge here to divert water. The paddle is thinner. But carving wooden oars and paddles have become almost a nostalgic tradition. Because it's much cheaper to simply buy one today. So Ralph Serigny and his Legno from St. Bernard Parish started carving nostalgic scenes on his because he regularly was seen at fairs and festivals selling them. But many people collect these types of utilitarian things, with or without decoration. Carving is very important, especially in this part of Louisiana. The Louisiana Wildfowl Carvers Association, based in New Orleans, has made it into a competition and exhibition event every year. Now, it grew out of the working decoys, and you'll see two here that are quite simple. They're not, they don't try to fool a person, but as one duck carver said, it doesn't take much to fool a duck. But as the tradition grew and the men became, it's predominantly a man's tradition, but there are some women. They got more and more elaborate. There was a stage where, like in the 30s, where Urban Perez would simply paint the decoy body. But here's one of his later pieces where, in addition to simply painting the body, he did start adding some of the feathers. But other carvers have taken this idea of individually carving feathers much more and getting much more stylized, or, well, they're realistic, but in more precise detail, I guess you could say. And here's one of Don Gomez's green teal, wing teal drakes, who's really a well-known carver. But the carvers took on, did other bird types. Here's Urban Perez's songbird, a bluebird. Then others took much more stylized approaches. Al Muller, who did all types of decoys also, but he did do some in much more stylized. Here's his egret. Ivy Billiot, this is one of his blue herons, which is an interesting combination of stylized and realistic features too. It's not completely stylized. Then Ivy was really well known. He did many different types of carvings of different scales. He was often at New Orleans Jazz Fest and carved quite large pieces for them. But here's a selection. This is a very stylized garfish, the snapping turtle, and then a redfish. Another carver that was often seen at, and still is at festivals, when we can have festivals again, is Roy Parfait. He was known for these small animals that are very highly polished, very finely finished. And he has other styles too, but I think this is one of his best known. These rabbits that he's known for are really exquisite. Then baskets. The one on the left is split cypress. If you're familiar with split oak, it's basically the same tradition using cypress, although this is by a Houma Indian Cyril Billiot. And notice the square bottom and the round opening at the top. Cyril is the only one that I'm aware of that made that was making these split cypress. This is in the Creole State Exhibit collection. But I think Janie recently said there was somebody else that knows it, but may not be active in it, which is so often with these traditions that since baskets are not needed, they're made as more of a statement about your heritage and your community. This area is much better known for palmetto weaving. These are the type that was typically made until what you'll hear about Janie's baskets. These are plated strands that are then coiled into baskets, and the coils are sewn. There are different styles, different makers had their marks. This is Marie Dean, who was a woman who only spoke French, but yet went to so many of the festivals across South Louisiana to sell her baskets. Then the rest of the, I'm going to share with you some images of Janie's traditions. And then Janie will talk more about them. Janie reintroduced the half-hitch coil basket, which had died out. And I'm sure she'll tell you that story. This is a full-size bassinet that she used with her family. And here's a close-up where you can see some of the details of the half-hitch. She also participated in the Passing It On workshops, and here she's teaching youth in an aftercare program. And what was so exciting about this program is she made it multi-generational. She invited a grandparent or elder to come with the child and work together. So it was a wonderful model to use. On the right, you see her years ago at a festival soaking the palmetto because it has to be wet when it's being worked. Another family tradition that was of Janie's family that was also shared by many other cultural groups is Spanish moss work. If you let the outer fiber, the outer sheath of the Spanish moth rot away, you're left with this fiber. It was needed by many communities across Louisiana because it was used to stuff mattresses. But the creatives in the communities realized you could make dolls and other things. There were different styles in different communities and families. Here again is Marie Dean's a collection of hers. So she decorated her dolls with palmetto clothing. And here's a doll in a baby bassinet. And she was known for these button eyes. But Janie's mother took the tradition in a different direction. She did use an armature to make the dolls, and she dressed her dolls in cloth. We also supported Janie's family teaching this tradition, and here's some student work where they chose to make an elephant. Another family tradition is Garfish Scales, and the Lusters have taken this farther than most other groups or families. They're frequently flowers, and large and small. They're known for these wonderful crosses. And you can see in this left photograph where they dye the Garfish scales and sort them and design with the various colors. Here's a nice close-up of the earrings that she makes, so you can see how they take the dye and really provide this wonderful texture. And again, they're teaching this with students also. This is the beginning of a student project. So that ends my the slideshow. Before we end it, I want to share that the website is called Folklife in Louisiana. The web address is louisianafolklife.org, and that's where you can find the Creole State exhibit and other articles about all the different traditions in Louisiana. One of the pages is on the Bayou Culture Collaborative, and you can learn more about it there, and you can sign up for emails about our offerings. So this is how to contact both of us. We can put this back up at the end if you need to. But now I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and it's Janie's turn to share with you.
Hello, I'm Janie Luster. I'm on the bayou on my back porch. And again, thank you, Maida. And it was through Maida funding that we were able to pass a lot of our traditions on. And our people, we find since Hurricane Andrew back in 1992, have been leaving our community. And through these workshops, we're able to pass this on. Even though they move away from our communities, we want to make sure that we prepare them, instructing them how to do some of these traditional crafts, and that they can bring it with them, always know where they're coming from, and being able to find the material in the areas, or even come back home at time to harvest the material that they need. I'm fortunate that both my parents were very active in preserving and carrying on these traditions. even from my great grandmother. You know, she was a traditional, I guess you would say, medicine woman or threadeuse. And she passed on a lot of her knowledge to my mom and myself. She treated my children when my children needed to be treated. And so, like I say, a lot of these traditions, you know, come from my family on both sides, both on my dad's side and my mom's side. Now, the basket, I had to learn from the curator of the Denver Art Museum, the late Mr. Richard Kahn. Very, very fortunate. You know, sometimes when you lose a tradition, it's hard to get it back. And we were fortunate. Claude Medford was supposed to come down and teach us this basket, but he ended up dying. And not too long after that happened, Miss Oradell Morris came into our lives and opened that door. She had done 13 years of research on this basket, and she was able to be in touch with Mr. Kahn. When she released her book, J'étends la chanson des Houma, she brought him down and we did a one-day workshop. And at that point, I didn't think that I was the basket weaver to bring this basket back, but it turned out, again, it's so important to have someone to work with. And that was the problem. We had no one to go to for advice as to, you at a point and you forget where you go on the next step. And so I was able to study the basket with Mr. Kahn, and Miss Morris even had a basket that she was able to put her hands on, that every so often I would go and look at it and look at the details. And finally, I got a basket that looked like the basket. But again, for the workshops, it was important that we went to the people rather than the people come to us. And like Maida said, it was multi-generational. And we had one family, even the dad participated. So they had their support system, like I said, to be able to rely on one another as to where do I go from here with this basket. So, like I said, very fortunate, you know, through the funding is one thing. And then also, like I say, Miss Marie Dean and her family, Bill Yoss from DuLarge, they kept our crafts alive for us. And now it's our responsibility to pass this on to generations to come to keep this alive for our people. I have a few things on my back porch that I can maybe turn my camera. I have another baby basket in the making, and really in the making for 25 years. It was supposed to be my son's baby basket, and I ended up having to be in a wheelchair. I had twisted my leg, and so I couldn't get around. And so that kind of didn't help things to move the basket along. And then when I was able to get back around, I took the basket at Con Brudet, the museum I used to work on, and different people had worked on it. So it had weak spots. And so about a year or two ago, I took it down to the base and started working on it again. I even used this time, I'm expecting my first great grandbaby in a matter of maybe 2 weeks, due on April 2nd. And so I'm trying to finish it up, but I learned how to strip the stem of the palmetto. So I'm using some of that to reinforce the bottom of it. And as you can see, I have other crafts. I have some of the crafts of my mom, the mall styles, and even some of the garfish work that we do with my daughter, Ann Luster Robichaud. So, and we have kept, my mom loved flowers, and she would make flowers out of the alligator garfish scales and also redfish scales. Anything she put her hands on, she would turn into flowers in a sense. And so we've taken this, we used to say we used to recycle, but now we say we upcycle the scales. So I think this is all that I have to say. If there's any questions, please.
All right, let me just unmute myself. Yeah, okay. So I would just encourage our listeners to write any questions that you have in that Q&A box, but I will get started with a question that I had, and this could be directed at both, you, Janie, and Maida. Maida, just seeing that map of all the land loss in Louisiana at the beginning of your presentation, I mean, it's definitely heartbreaking being from Louisiana. But just in your position, and then Janie, just knowing people who are affected by land loss and are moving to other places, do y'all have a sense of like where people are moving? Are they moving to other parts of the state, to more inland areas? And do you find that people are able to take some or most of their traditions with them?
I can answer that. Some of the people since 1992, like I said, for Andrew, moved to the upper end of the bayous, especially the younger generation. Now, with the other storms that's come in and devastated us, like Rita, that was the same time, just a couple weeks after Katrina, Rita hit us, and also Ike. And some of the people have moved to the Baton Rouge area, and then in St. Tammany. Also, the people from like St. Bernard have moved to Covington, Mandeville area. And so we've seen that through the years, that I can say that I have people from down here that have moved to those areas.
Yeah.
What Janie said is very typical of what's happening in Louisiana, that people who do move tend to move slightly north in the watershed. That bayous have very distinctive cultures, and just jumping from one bayou to the next is considered a far move. It just doesn't typically happen. Now, some are jumping up to Baton Rouge, the North Shore and such, and some are leaving the state. We have a really high out migration rate, so that we have a net loss of population right now. But most of the movement is within the state. And whether or not a tradition is retained depends on a number of things. Traditions are passed on within groups through interaction, gatherings, education, and this can be formal or informal. So it depends on whether you move with a group. So when you just move, 5 miles north, you're still connected to your community. Some traditions move easier than others, and this was way before land loss. Some traditions are more resistant to being lost than others, and the most significant one is foodways. But if your tradition, like Janie, is walking out your back door and catching crabs for tonight's dinner, and you move away from a bayou, it's kind of hard to keep that tradition. You may keep the love of crabs, you may make the gumbo in the same way, but if you're changing ecological systems, then you're more likely to lose those that are so connected to it. And there's so many things that are really deeply connected to the land, and your specific spot. You have to know when the crabs are running, what net you need. There's all kind of traditional ecological knowledge that is dependent on that tradition being maintained. So you can take that knowledge with you, but if you don't have the ability to practice it, it's more likely to be changed. So in between that kind of example and foodways, which is the most resistant to change. There's a whole gradation of whether or not the materials are going to be available, whether or not the plant grows. And I see what Janie has in her hand, and I want her to explain what that is.
This is filet. My mom was a filet maker. She had her own trees. And I realized just recently, I had a picture of my oldest son when he was about 7 years old, standing by her trees. My mom knew what was happening with the hurricanes. When you flood, the water comes from the Gulf and it's salty water that stays in the ground. And so her trees are all gone now. By the time, say 95 or so, she was gathering leaves from my neighbor's area. And just in a matter of maybe 5 years there, those trees have died or even eroded into the bayou, dying at that point. And so this community, I don't know that we have sassafras trees. Now, but Upper Grand Bayou, my cousin transplanted trees from this community to his home area in Grand Bayou and Shrimpers Row. And he's really nurtured them, and they make filet. And I just met a cousin who lives in Delcombe, and he's got filet trees over there, and he makes filet. And that's so unusual now. You don't find many filet makers that the sassafras leaves come from here. Because I know I've seen people sell the filet like on the roadside, and you ask them, where do the leaves come from? Where's your trees? Oh, they come from Alabama. So it's different. And, to have your own trees in your backyard, that's a treasure. Mom enjoyed it. Her filet was well known. People from all over the communities would come at the time when she would make it and want to buy her filet. And a lot of times at the festivals, and especially with Ms. Lorena Langley, they would always trade. She would get a little basket and Ms. Langley would get the filet.
Wow. Oh, well, thanks, Janie and Maida. We do have some questions from the audience. So let's start with this one. And this is for Janie. The question is, are you experimenting with any other materials besides the palmetto, Spanish moss, and fish scales? Yeah,
I've started to work, like I said, with the stem of the palmetto. We used to make baskets out of the stem of the palmetto. This is Tom Culvert's basket, and he was encouraged me to try to learn how to do this basket using the stem of the palmetto. So I don't think it's for me to learn, but I think I have to learn to encourage someone else to be able to learn this, because it is part of our history, also part of our culture. And I'm sure that we use the palmetto to the full extent. My dad lived in a palmetto hut for the first 7 years of his life. The roof and the walls were made with palmetto. Like I said, hats, fans were made. So from the leaf, but the stem was also used. So if we could bring this back, it would really be nice.
Well, Janie, now I know what we need to make happen.
And now
Janie and I have known each other for decades, but I'm always learning more. Her family is really well known for maintaining so many traditions that other families have let pass on. But I'd like to point out Janie's a comment she said to me a while back about palmetto. She had been worried about palmetto dying out, and I said, well, you can come get some in my yard that I didn't plant. That palmetto is an incredibly hardy plant, but I don't know how to use it. But anywhere there's a damp land, there's going to be palmetto. So, but you still have to know how to use it. It doesn't matter if the plant is there if you don't know how to use it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Janie, have you used some of Maida's palmettos? Have you taken her up on her offer?
I need to. I haven't, but I need to. Have to come up. And a lot of times people are kind of confused. When I worked at Museum Converde in Kenner, they would bring me leaves galore, but we don't use the leaf in a sense. We use the leaf before it opens up. The heart of the palmetto. I have one here that's kind of dry. This is the heart that's before it opens up into the massive green leaf. It's light in color. And if I can turn my camera, you see the green leaf? By that time, it's too late to weave. We use the heart of the palmetto.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it has to be dried. And then like Maida said in the PowerPoint, you have to soak it also. And depending on how long it's been harvested is how long you would soak it. This is kind of fresh. I got it maybe 6 weeks ago. And so I would leave this in the water for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And usually I use hot water. It kind of accelerates the process rather than just cold water. Even though last night I'm working on that basket, I wanted to put my palmetto outside in the rainwater. We had a lot of rain down here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, all right, we have another question. Let's see. This one, maybe both of y'all can answer. Are there any specific traditions that have already been severely affected by climate change, either due to migration or material availability? Well, yeah, I guess we kind of touched on it a little bit, but if y'all have any other examples of that.
Our plants are dying, and that's because of the hurricanes and also the saltwater intrusion. I know Mr. Whitney Dardar from the Golden Meadow area. He had a lot of plants that he had to move to his daughter's house, Miss Brenda Dardar Robichaud, who was principal chief at one time, and she lived in Raceland. So he took a lot of his plants from his home down in Golden Meadow because of the flooding to her house. So we're seeing a lot of that. And even the palmetto, like I say, the salt water gets to it. I transplanted palmetto myself when we got our levee. They came, it was good to get a levee, but it was also sad for me to see them just going through the areas where my dad used to harvest palmetto to make the palmetto huts at the festivals. And so I asked the worker that was, he was cutting them down with a big old machinery that was like a huge weed eater. And so I asked if he could save me some, and he said, sure. So he put them by the road edge. And so I had to tell my husband about that. And I told my son not to say anything. Let me tell you, Dad, first. But as we were driving through a pizza place, my son says, guess what, Daddy? Mama's got some palmetto for us to pick up. And so we transplanted them, but I had maybe 3 of them left out of maybe 10 that we had transplanted. It's very hard, but I've taken the seed of the palmetto and planted that. I planted some along my bayou side maybe 12 years ago, at least 12, 15 years ago. And they're small now, they're coming out. Easier to plant by seed, more time consuming, but transplanting is very hard to do.
Yeah.
Well, I would add that affecting the plants is definitely the most affected cultural trait. But what you do with a lot of the plants ends up being threatened too. So all the herbal medicine traditions, if you can't find that plant, then that tends to drop out of what people are doing with it. And as a result, there are a number of groups and efforts in South Louisiana to save that knowledge and the plants. The Land Memory Bank project is actually, it has some connections to Hattiesburg, the university, with traditional gardens, trying to save them and the knowledge about them. Monique Verdun is a Houma Indian contemporary artist who does a wide range of art forms. You know, she calls it the Land Memory Bank.
Wow, that's cool. And so they're partnering with someone in Hattiesburg with the university? Oh, okay. Wow, that's really neat. Hmm. Well, let's see.
I want to point out Janie's holding something.
Oh,
I think this is probably one of the endangered plants.
Yes, it is. It grows wild in ditches along the roadside, but that's one area that we would never harvest from. And so we take it from the marsh area where there's no roads or anything. And the root of it is used to make baby necklaces when they teethen. And also my dad would cut the root up and put it in a mason jar, and he would drink that as a tisane, as they would say, like a tea. And it was a blood purifier. And it's called bomalo, or the arrow plant. You can see the leaf. It's like in the shape of an arrow. But it grows well. You can still find it. But like I say, it's where you find it that's the better place to find it, not the roadside. Smells real good and tastes pretty good too. It's not as bad as what you would think.
oh wow. Yeah, that's cool. We do have another question and I want to get to it. Are there any traditional crafts, traditions or crafts making a comeback? So the positive side of some of this. And I guess I could, yeah, Janie or me.
As our tribe, I think there's an effort being made to bring and keep these crafts alive. Working with Indian education is one of the other areas that I've worked with during summer camps, and the kids are really, really interested. I had one young man that accelerated in the basket making, Brett Williams, and like I say, I want to say he goes to South Terrebone, and his brother lives in New York. And so he was able to teach his brother how to do this basket. So the interest in our youth is there. So it's for us, the elders, to pass these things on. And I see the interest, and like I say, like funding from Maida's programs make things possible.
Yeah. And
We
Maida,
haven't been going long enough to really say, you know, what kind of impact that the program is having on whether or not things are reviving. But I do want to mention brown cotton weaving. It's a little farther west. It's more around the Lafayette area. But brown cotton was the type of cotton that the earliest Acadian settlers focused on. As opposed to white cotton. It's a little bit more finicky, but they liked it for the aesthetics, and the blankets and the clothing that they made are important historically. But there's been a huge interest recently, like in the last 5 to 10 years, about this. And right now at the in Lafayette is a wonderful exhibit about brown cotton weaving. They have a nice website about it too. And that's at the Hilliard Museum at University of Louisiana at Lafayette.
oh, great. Yeah.
That's
And,
one that is coming back in terms of, you know, more and more interest in it.
oh, wow. Well, Maida, I also just wanted to ask you real quick, because I know we're pressed for time, but what have you been seeing a lot of this in the workshops that you've been doing? You know, Janie had mentioned the youth are taking on these traditions. Have there been a lot of young people involved in your
It
workshop?
depends on, again, the community determines what tradition and how they want to do it. Janie was very focused on the youth and wanted this multi-generational aspect to it. But other communities might be focused on one adult, like for brown cotton weaving, Elaine Bork, one of the most significant weavers left, or the only significant weaver left from the tradition. They're spinners and weavers, but they don't necessarily come from that tradition. She wanted to focus on one apprentice. And so it was one-on-one. So it depends on what they want to do, because so much of this really depends on the master's motivation to pass it on in the way that they want to. And we used to have apprenticeship programs. And what I found is many of the masters were quite picky about who they wanted to pass it on to, especially on a one-on-one relationship. It's a very intimate relationship over the course of a year. And so you have to want to invest your energies into that person, those people. So I leave that up to the master of how they want to do this.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, let me see. We're at 56. I think we have one question I'm seeing in the chat. I think we have time for it. I'll just ask it. Okay. I know it's good to save the land, but I wonder whether there are concerns about how this will affect the ecology, plants and fishing, etc. Yeah, that was the question. So I guess I'm just,
Well, it's changed. This is a delta. It's a river delta. It is by definition changing. It over centuries and thousands of years. Like Bayou Lafourche and Bayou Teche used to be the Mississippi River, as well as the Atchafalaya. So this is a changing landscape, and people being on it have always had to adapt to whatever it was. And so they moved communities. Most people don't realize there are a lot of relic communities that people say, we used to live there, and after this storm, we moved here. Or we tried farming in this area and it was abandoned. Like in the middle of the Atchafalaya swamp near Lake Barrett, they tried sugarcane for, during the 1800s. Well, they abandoned it. So there's a whole lot of, South Louisiana is a history of moving, changing, and adapting. And so what's happening now is simply a continuation. It's accelerated significantly now. But there has always been these storms, these changing lands, especially after people started interfering with the natural processes.
right.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank y'all so much, Maida and Janie. It's been a pleasure to help facilitate this, and I'll turn it over to Afton for closing comments.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Maida. Thank you, Janie. Thanks for sharing about the crafts, but also how the climate change is affecting those. I don't think that we can stress that enough. And thank you, Maria, for serving on our committee, our Art and Varner committee, and to help organize today's discussion. Thank you, Maida. Thank you, Janie. I want to sit on your back porch.
You can come fishing out here.
Deal. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.